Welcome to Code Savvy Presents, a podcast about computer science, technology, accessibility, and inclusion.
My name is Kathy Hurchla, Catherine, you may see my name as. I am currently a analytics lead for a really awesome design agency called Fantasy Interactive. We do really human experience design. So that can mean website, user interface design, or something you do in your car, or even like store experiences as well as online. So yeah, a very interesting, fairly new space for me to be in from a data and analytics perspective, but really that work is aimed at informing how we should design experiences for people, what people want and need. So at its very basic level. And before that, I continue to have my own small sort of enterprise, which is called Data Design Dimension.
And name.
Yes, thank you. So that's, I started a few years ago, and I haven't been working since I began working with Fantasy. I haven't been working with clients as much, but that was really more general data visualization or overall data solutions. And I continue to sometimes write. So one of the ways I enjoy continuing to learn is to write blog posts, interview people, and I always learn something from that as well. And also kind of force myself to articulate, to be able to teach other people. It helps me to really formalize my own understanding of any topic. So that's something I continue to do, but I've worked in healthcare and children's pediatric healthcare previously, as well as more arts and culture. So a lot of work in the not-for-profit space, using data to inform fundraising before I actually returned to school. So we'll, I'm sure, talk about that a little bit more, but so that's kind of a little bit about who I am. I'm currently in Vermont. So I live in northern Vermont, but I've spent the last almost 20 years in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Nice.
So I'm kind of a little bit been all over.
Well, it sounds like you also have kind of a wide variety of experience in your background too. That's really awesome. And I can imagine that helps a lot with the human experience design, because you've walked in a bunch of different kinds of shoes. So
yeah, that's absolutely true. I think empathy is a big part of any role, but definitely anything to do with data, we have to stay in touch with like the people who are using it on the other end.
right.
And I believe everyone should have a customer service job or two in their career.
Absolutely.
Just to learn that that's not where you're really good, and you better heads down with a computer and numbers. So
absolutely, I 100% agree.
So yeah, I kind of started there and then got to be on the other end of it. Like, okay, what do these people in that situation need from information that we can do to help?
Right. What got you interested in data to begin with? Like, how did you realize that it was such an important thing to focus on?
So I started with a strong interest in visual art. And so I'm always going to have an indirect answer to that question. I think I continued to sort of look back and, ask that of myself. Yeah. But so I did have the opportunity to have my undergraduate education was in fine arts and visual arts. And I did do some graphic design there. So I started to get more into computers, but it was much more general. So I think it developed a creative problem solving way of approaching anything. So just like if you go maybe to a business focused problem, there's maybe, or a business focused program, there's a little bit more of a linear problem solving, maybe logical, or computer science maybe is more logical. So for me, it was more from a kind of relationships and like, how do we turn a problem on its head to solve it? Or, okay, if we're having trouble finding out what the answer, what is not the answer? Like, so where are those guardrails? And I mean, the long story short is that it's sort of spatial thinking, I think. So I entered data a little bit more from a kind of cause and effect, problem solving context. And so then I did start working in an art museum in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And I think that was my first real hands on the ground. How do we solve business problems with information? And,
Yeah.
how do the people really working with the public, what information do they need? And like, so it was very much from a basic needs background of working with data, storing data, managing it, what sort of questions do we need to answer? And then from there, I think went to more of an analyst role and more of the analytical, not so much just the management side. And that's where I found I think the creative problem solving came back into it, where I found, I'm sort of seeing things in the information or seeing things in the situation that maybe my peers didn't, because it was applying that creative problem solving, but also having some of those tangible skills with working with data, and putting the two together.
Awesome. So I want to come back to, we're going to come back to kind of the overall, we wanted to talk about Python as it relates to data, but I have a question on that, this kind of tangent. Can you give us an example of maybe sometime in your business, like maybe it's at the museum, where having the ability to visualize data really helped a situation, or helped you communicate those things to your peers or your higher ups?
Yeah, definitely. As you mentioned, Python actually really entered my career later. So, but the underlying principles of communicating data to people, and even to myself as I was understanding, what was relevant to share with reports, for example,
Yeah.
the underlying principles of just how we visualize information, how our brains work. Some of that did start really young in my career. So I'd say one of the earliest examples at the art museum. So it was working with a major fundraising campaign. We were, raising funds for both education as well as like building expansions, and working with external board members who would help us to also, they were philanthropic, supported the organization, also volunteered with us and were true partners. So that was an interesting communication barrier. Sort of they were on the inside and got to know a little bit more than general public, but also they were our they were our audience as well in a unique sense.
Yeah.
So being able to really make their lives easy by taking reports that were numbers, and I would say like a lot of the work I've done sometimes is like highly confidential. So it's like, and it's kind of hard to understand if you haven't worked in fundraising, but essentially it's like matching people that show an interest or an inclination to support work, or maybe they have interests in their career that overlap with what your organization is doing. And then also, they need to have money to spare. So it's kind of like some of that too, putting those things together. So there's a lot of numbers there, but we were really trying to just show these individuals, these volunteers, who that they should focus on, and who we are close to in our conversations, who it's very likely they would be able to make a donation. And then going sort of down from there. So you think of like sorting order, there's time-based, so those are the sort of problems that graphs can really help with, and simple things like a funnel, right? We think about like things that are the top of the funnel versus the bottom, what's going to fall first, or just the way that even if there's no chart involved, we think about like a bar chart or maps as visualization, but like visualization is also just who do you show at the top of a report, or you have 5 minutes to talk with someone, what do you say first? Because you might not get to the bottom of the list. So it's knowing like just how to use in any tool.
The hierarchy of your data. Yeah.
Yes, it's kind of like sorting order, because so those are some of the first things I did to say like, okay, we have these reports, we're not really getting a lot of great feedback on them, or they're inconsistent. So we really need to be able to scale it, make it consistent. And that's one thing like data can really help with, like making things really structured so you can produce something the same over and over. It's dynamic in a sense.
Yeah.
And you don't need fancy tools for that. Something like Excel is great for that, but it's like, how do you structure it to make the most of people's time, any kind of communication or report?
Okay. You just mentioned tools, so let's talk about that a little bit. What are some of the more common libraries or tools that you use in your data visualization these days?
Yeah, so these days, so I love Python. I'm an absolute Pythonista now. I did have an incredible opportunity to return to school. So, I'm very fortunate in that sense that I had a little bit more structured opportunity to learn Python. But I think also now, looking back, I realize I can share so many ways you can learn Python, for data visualization specifically, or other things without a college degree. For me in particular, because I went back to school as a grown adult with kids, I didn't really have the time in my young career to do it, or it was hard to learn while I was doing. So
Yeah.
all that to say, there are lots, but so today I use, my favorite is definitely the Plotly graphing libraries, which I am a formal volunteer ambassador for. And
Awesome.
but I use many in my career. What I love about Plotly is that when you really want to style something, and again in a really dynamic way, so when you're working in organizations, you often have to work within their visual brand. So different parts of the organization might be making communications or charts and different tools, PowerPoint, Keynote, or you name it.
Yeah.
And to be able to insert with that, you have to be able to match it. So Python is excellent because you can do mathematical, formulas and operations and clean data really quickly. But if you're going to produce something that you want to actually show people, it really has to be styled really well. And
Right.
so, and you can do that in a lot of the different Python data visualization libraries, but Plotly in particular, you can really work with their themes and templates to make it just what you need, so you don't have to do those finessing every single time. And it also works with some other libraries they have, which are called Dash, which in today's day and age, often it's not a static chart. It's an interactive tool that you want, to share with people. So something that they can do on the web, sort of like a mini website, but that doesn't just show them something, that gives them the ability to actually interact and that they can analyze themselves in an analytical
Yeah.
way. So it's a powerful library in that sense. There certainly are competitors too. And I use, it's like different libraries do different things really well. But that's certainly my favorite. Another is Matplotlib, which is probably it's sort of the grandfather or grandmother.
Okay.
So Matplotlib is the more modern, I'd say, iteration of MATLAB, which is, was a desktop software tool for statistics and had all these amazing charting capabilities. And so people kind of replicated that in Python. And so Matplotlib is incredible, and probably the very, basic charting, the first thing you'd often start with. And what I love about that too is it's built into some of the other everyday libraries that you would use in Python for cleaning data or preparing data, or even just basic summarizing, operations. So like, for example, the pandas library, which I start almost every project with pandas, is one of the first libraries I import. And even without importing Matplotlib separately, and by importing, you're basically allowing, your project to use those functions and methods. But there's some of the miniature parts of Matplotlib are dependencies that come with pandas. And so I'm a
Okay, so it's
big,
all kind of built in to the, yeah.
I'm a big proponent that data visualization doesn't happen at the end. It shouldn't happen in a silo.
Yeah.
I still have, I'm fortunate to have a wonderful Python professor, Larry Gray, who was the first one to tell me, like, to visualize early and visualize often. So,
All
that's
right.
my quote, certainly is. And I'm sure, he'll always credit the larger data science community, anything he's learned too. But so anytime, it doesn't take a fancy chart or fancy library. It's not just like doing it frequently and making it part of your process to understand what you're looking at and also make your own life easier.
I
It's
was
not
going to
just
say
for
it
other
would,
people.
I could imagine that would help you actually see the story that you want to tell and be able to visualize it better for other people. Because if
Yeah.
you're testing and you're seeing, okay, it doesn't really lay out nicely this way, what else could we try? So
Yep.
that makes sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and some of what the Python visualization libraries do, if you think about if you've used Excel and you used like the auto sum, it
Yeah.
adds things up and it's like boom. So for example, it could do that, but also graph it in one little statement, one line of code, and so some of
Yeah.
those things, it's just like it makes your life so easy and super quick. And it's, if you have a styled template ahead of time, you could also produce something that you can share really quickly as well. But it doesn't have to be pretty. It's more of an understanding tool and a data exploration tool.
Okay. Are there common, and maybe you don't know the answer to this because it's such an over general term, but like, are there common use cases, or what are the most common use cases that you know of for people using Python with data visualization? Like, is it for dashboards or maps or charting? Like, what do you think are the common areas that, or what kinds of data, I guess, would be mostly used?
So, that's a very interesting question, because I think when you you can look at visualization use cases in general, and there's some of those most common, we can kind of have a conversation around that, and just what do we use every day? We don't even think about, like
Yeah.
apps, clocks and things like that, all these basic problems that we solve with visualization every day. But then when you think about Python, and I'll just say, like, versus something like a Tableau or a Microsoft BI, business
Yeah.
intelligence, they do a lot of the same things, but it's a little bit more of a drag and drop kind of general user interface. You can build those things with Python. So are there differences?
So would you say it's
How
more
it's used with the
customized, like more
other?
customizable, or?
Yeah, I would say definitely more customizable. That's one of the things I love about it, is that I feel like there are nearly no bounds, and there's so much flexibility in tools like Tableau and Microsoft BI. Or I started also with Click, which is popular in the healthcare community. But you're a little bit more boxed in that sense. So
Yeah.
I think when you're working with Python visualization, yeah, it can often be either to build something highly customizable that is close to the data pipelines or data production of your organization. So I'd say by that, I mean, like, versus using a JavaScript specific tool, which is more like a front end. If someone who designs interactive animations or something might be more working in JavaScript directly. And that's not as common of a library for someone who's taking data from, the warehouse and some other, relational customer database, and kind of pushing them together. And then, so Python is a little closer to that data engineering side of the house. It's
Okay.
known as a glue library. So it's sort of like,
How do you stick things together and do
exactly,
something
yeah,
with them?
exactly. Yeah. So
Okay.
sometimes it's like kind of aligning those different people. And,
Right.
in some libraries in Python now are able to render JavaScript. So it's sort of like trying to abstract that to make it so, much like a Tableau does, like, let's make this whole process easier. You shouldn't have to learn all the front end libraries. I mean, you might need to learn a little bit if you want to make more like web-based dashboards with Python, or analytics tools that, show something really interactively.
Yeah.
You're going to become knowledgeable with a little bit of HTML and some, kind of basic front end that can help, but you can stay in one language in Python. So if you're someone who comes a little bit more from that data side of the house, I think you can still produce pretty amazing interactive visualizations and not have to learn all those front end libraries also. So yeah, I would say like either that customization or more so in the analytics or data science space where yes, we're producing materials to share with people, but it's more about the analysis, the statistics, and I'd say the other biggest kind of competitor or alternative tool there then is R programming.
Yes.
And I sometimes do use both. A lot of the libraries like Matplotlib are kind of like, you can now use them in either, or there's a ggplot is one that's really kind of the equivalent in R. So, not to like confuse you, say you need to use both, but you can learn a
You
little bit of
could.
both, and
Yeah.
sometimes someone just favors one or the other. Or you have a really great teacher in one or the other that can make a big difference.
Right.
But both can do, very similar things and are still more, I'd say, tied to that analytics space, and Python a little bit more, I'd say, to the data engineering space, because of that commonality of language and that glue. Yeah.
Awesome.
But now it's getting to the point where it's like, you could build full-blown dashboards with it. It might take you a little more time than
Right.
than purchasing, but I think depending on where you work, it's that time is money sort of conversation.
Right.
Buy versus build. Like, do you have a lot of time to build it yourself? Or could you buy an off-the-shelf product like Tableau, and then you can spend your time more on just customizing those dashboards?
Reports
You
and
can
yeah.
sometimes use Python in those tools as well. They have like custom fields you can insert some of your own code.
Okay.
So still push those customization boundaries even in
The box.
the box. Exactly. You can sort of, make the box grow.
Yeah. So do you have any recommendations for people who maybe want to increase their data literacy and expand their knowledge in that space, like not just for Python and data visualization, but just data in general? Are there any kind of resources or things that you would suggest people learn, or a book or anything that might be helpful?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it depends on, where you're starting to. Like, my road to where I've been at kind of started with relational databases like customer relationship management databases. Tables are joined and with linking keys and sort of all on the left and only the ones that match on the right, or things like that. So
Yeah.
I still think that is always the place people should start, even though in this day and age, data is stored in lots of different ways. We're in this age of big data where
Yeah.
also I just think it's a fundamental understanding, because when you're working in so SQL, whether it's learning a little bit of SQL, structured query language, and there's lots of great LinkedIn Learning modules and things. I know through Philadelphia and other cities, just with a public library card, you can get access to LinkedIn Learning for free. So I always kind of like to start there versus other, alternative tools. But anything where you're learning by doing, that's how I learn. But books are great too. So I would say a book that I was recommended early was called Database Design for Mere Mortals. And
Okay.
again, it's kind of like a little bit old school, like it's that relational, but and I started in Microsoft Access. Don't use Microsoft Access. I mean, not to down any tool, but like there's probably lots of better alternatives. But just anything where you're creating a basic structure and just understanding how those things glue together, so you can know how to get data from over here and then something from over here, and making or finding, if it's there, a common link. Because often when you get into analyzing information, it's the big question is, compared to what? So, okay, we have a
Right.
really big number. It looks big, but like, how do we know what big is? So one of the things I love to do is using external data sources, whether they're like in your own company, you know, something from another department, or public data, even better. So then you're sometimes having to find or create a way to link them together. But that's where I think the magic is, to say, okay, you know, we have this, but how does that compare to what, you know, a really reputable public study of data that I can just download from the internet?
Right.
And if they both have a zip code or something where I can match up with like United States Census data, if it's US or something like that, then you can really see where the gaps are and what is like meaningfully big versus just what's got 6 digits. So that's big, right? You know?
Right.
So I think, yeah, basic linking, database structure is a big one. What else? Like when you get into, if you're interested more on the analysis side, definitely don't ignore basic, and basic not meaning like for dummies, because you know basic statistics is not for dummies. But I
Yeah.
think like we forget to talk about statistics when we hear about all these fancy terms and data science today and everything. It's like, you know, so there's some good books about statistics that don't make your eyes roll in the back of your head. Feel like, oh, this is not
Right.
for me. Because when I went back to study and had, you know, master's level statistics, I hadn't taken calculus since high school. And I was like, oh my goodness. So I really had to do a little more heavy lifting on my own, just to re-familiarize myself with a little bit of that. But so there's a lot there. And I love the cartoon series. What is it? Yeah. The cartoon. So I'll get you the list, but it's
Okay.
almost like the, you know, stats for dummies, but it's in a like a funnier way. So if you can laugh
Okay.
about it and understand it in a joke, then I think that you really can
Much
understand the
easier.
concept. Yeah.
Yeah, much easier to grok. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely some statistics, and then and that's something I think even a seasoned data science professional sometimes has missed. So there's more books coming out now that are, you know, reminding us what some of those basic underlying principles are. Because one of the challenges with Python is once you become very comfortable using libraries that exist, is you can grab things that you don't fully understand.
Right.
And so sometimes, so you can apply an algorithm, you know, a fancy mathematical formula that does something incredible. But if you can't explain it to yourself or to your boss or something, you know, then you might end up misusing it. And that's not a good thing. So I think just like taking a step back and having to think about what is it really doing. And, you know, oftentimes the default options, like, I'll give an example. Like recently I worked on a clustering segmentation problem with a colleague, and we're sort of debating, you know, how many clusters is the right cluster. And there's lots of mechanisms to determine with your particular data set where it's statistically significant. Like, is it more meaningful to divide this into 3 groups of people based on whatever criteria, or is it more meaningful to divide it into 5? And there's often a default in the library, which works most of the time. So not to say like, you know, to scare anyone, but like, you know, just understanding why is that the default, you know, and when would it be more relevant to recognize that, you know, that's not significant with your particular situation, because there's no, like, why use 5 when there's no more difference than if you use 3? Because then you're just confusing everyone and forcing people to store more information in their brains than they need to, when 3 is a much easier number to wrap our heads around than 5.
Right. Right.
So, so yeah, some basic math principles are always good. And there's some, I think that's where like books can be a little better, but also YouTube. YouTube is a fantastic tool.
It is. It is.
I don't know about you, Valerie, but I Google a lot, whether it's
Everything.
or Google or, you know,
yeah.
yeah.
Always and everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there's some really, really generous people out there. Actually, a colleague of mine who as I got more involved in Plotly, I began using his Charming Data YouTube channel to learn Plotly. So when you get into more specific libraries too, you'll often find like a free YouTube channel that is just incredible. And people are so generous, whether it's like sharing their Python code that you can use to learn, or developing educational tutorials just often for free. It's a really generous community with lots of ways to learn.
How engaged are you in that community? Are there meetups, or are you like finding like-minded people? What does that look like from kind of an open source community standpoint?
Yeah, so I would say right now I'm struggling to find how engaged can I be now that I am in a full-time position again.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge. But I think I was very engaged while I was learning and while I was in school, and it was something that school certainly also didn't give me, I mean, so whether you're learning in a structured way or not, or just entirely self-guided, it's one of the best ways that you can, I just think stretch your knowledge and learn much more quickly. And so I had the opportunity to start meeting with a global small group of other Plotly ambassadors, and hearing from people who are coming to the same, I think, tool from very different industries was really a good way to learn as well. So someone coming from the supply chain industry and sort of like, hey, how do we apply this tool in that problem space? And or people who came from different backgrounds, like maybe I had a little more of the like asking those design questions, because both my education focus and my background was more like, we really have to think about how it looks in order for people to digest it, and not only from a beauties standpoint, but okay, it's great, any tool can quickly create 17 categories, but no one can remember 17 categories, and they're having to go back and forth between a legend and a graph. So, that sort of design, more like user interface too. So those occasional calls were really beneficial, and some often for me it was around writing blogs or doing like live presentations or video recorded presentations for conferences that had an educational focus. So how to do, for example, the custom templates in Plotly. So that was great to be able to schedule time with someone else, maybe all over the world, and work through a problem together. That sort of pair programming in in the computing space. I learn a lot that way. And it's a smaller group too. So it's, a little different than even like a class situation. So I think, yeah, and for a lot of people, that's a really great way to learn, to connect with people. So yeah, but it is difficult because, often you're not getting paid to do it. And I think
right,
it's if you feel as though, gosh, I have nothing to give to this community, I don't have enough coding skills or something. There's a lot of other ways to get involved, and I know you get out of it as much or more than you give to the community sometimes. And to remember that, like, a lot of these libraries that are free, like in Python or R, it's because people are just passionate, and they also just love to solve problems. I mean, sometimes it's ego too. It's like, right, answer first.
Right.
But that's also a really great way to learn. These Kaggle competitions. That's something I'd like to do a little bit more, where there's,
tell me about that. What is that?
Okay, so Kaggle is, and there's a bunch of others that are similar, but companies even will sponsor a competition. Often they have to pay, so because they get something out of it. Yeah. But it's essentially saying, here's a data set. Here's a real life business problem. When I say business, it doesn't necessarily mean like financial business, but like a real life contextual problem. Solve this with this data. And Kaggle, might give you like, here's sort of to get started with, here's an algorithm or something you could try to use, or they might just keep it more open-ended. But lots of people, I know some of the fellow ambassadors with Plotly have done a lot more of this than me, and you get points, and there's sort of that gaming fun to it.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
you also get to see what other people do, and they might solve the problem really differently than you approached it. So
Which
yeah, that's
that's
great.
huge for expanding your knowledge and your understanding of how it all works. So that's cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. Particularly if you're someone who is teaching yourself, or,
Right.
you sometimes find yourself learning in a vacuum, you can lose touch with like a totally different approach to it, or just, it's a simple thing like, oh, I had a colleague just yesterday show me a NumPy method that took 2 seconds, where I was writing a custom function that was like, once I finished it, it was just as quick, but like, again, like people
It
have
would have saved you some
libraries.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. So you pick things up along the way, because it just shrinks the universe. I think the universe is so big. It's
Right.
like, which tool do I use? Or
Well,
what's
and it can be super daunting to look at all of that and then not know which way to go.
absolutely. Yeah. Or
Yeah.
some of it sounds bigger or scarier than it really is, when you see someone else go through it in a real context, then it just takes it a step further to feeling like something you could do yourself. And it's
Right.
and it's low, you can also download the code, and you don't have to upload your solution if you don't feel comfortable or ready to do that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but I think
Keep it.
those situations where it's not just find some data and find the tool, it's kind of putting it together in a much more understandable way. It's a better way to learn.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Is there any, are you still writing blogs, or is there a way that people might follow your work or learn more about your adventures in data?
Yeah, sure. So I do mean a couple places. I do maintain a website, which is data.design, but I'll spell it. It's DADEDA dot design. That's DESIGN. So that's really my data design dimension, as well as kind of my personal
Okay.
portfolio. But that's probably the best place to start. Links to a lot of my other things I'm doing, but I have a Medium page, and I was recently had a chance to do my first article, which you can link to from the website. So it's probably just easier to give people one place.
Okay.
But yeah, I had a chance to write my first towards data science article through Medium recently, and so that was really exciting. So I hope to do that more. But a lot of where I'm writing as well right now is through the Data Visualization Society, or DVS sometimes. So we have a journal for the society called Nightingale, which is named after Florence Nightingale, who a famous statistician and nurse, who historically is probably one of the first female data viz professionals you may hear about. So I'm involved with the editorial committee there, and also write a bit. So that's been a great place to work out some ideas that are more closely tied to data visualization, and interview some professionals and different parts of the space, because that's a pretty big realm. Everyone from someone who considers themselves maybe a data scientist to someone who aligns more closely to the graphic design side of it. So I love, that group and being involved with them. So yeah, on their blog, you can find a page where I have some articles too. And sometimes I cross post them after a while on my Medium page as well. But yeah, so writing, yeah, I think writing is I've always been a writer. For some people, it's videos too. I mean, I haven't done like the Twitch or something where you're live coding. That would be fun. But I
Yeah.
do have a YouTube channel you can get to from my website as well, where if I have a chance to have something recorded with a conference, I'll try to post it there as well. I've definitely been someone who tried my own blogs over the years and realized I just couldn't keep up consistently. So I look more for opportunities where I can write in other existing spaces. Because you can lose people, and you can just have trouble getting in front of people if you can't post regularly. I think that's the
I
hard
think that's the key. Yeah. Just keeping
thing.
it consistent and Yeah. And so people they know they can trust to come to you for whatever information they need. So
Yeah, definitely. So bookmark me, but don't expect like something every week. And I do really look forward to sharing more about what we're doing at Fantasy Interactive over time. It's a really exciting space to be in, customer experience, human experience, kind of how do we use data to inform that better, to kind of shrink the space between, audiences and like designers and
right.
companies that are trying to do things that everyone wants, but it's just there's so much noise and so much chatter. So I think it'll be really interesting to reflect more on that as I have a little more time in that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kathy, for taking the time today to talk with me and give me all this awesome information. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we will cross paths again.
Oh yes, I'm delighted, and thank you so much for asking me, Valerie. I would like to spend more time with students, and so this was a great way to kind of reconnect.
Code Savvy Presents is produced by Code Savvy, a 501c3 nonprofit organization committed to making computer science accessible. Visit us at www.codesavvy.org.